Today, I'll be making a case for the Deuterocanon using early Christian iconography. So this is not typically an argument you might hear in favor of the Deuterocanon, but I think early Christian iconography is an interesting way to support the canonicity of these very beautiful books of Scripture. So let's get right into it. So early Christian iconography was rich with Deuterocanonical icons. We know of icons of the whole Susanna cycle, that's scenes from the story of Susanna. We have the three youths in the furnace in Oran's position, which indicates the prayer of Azariah. There are scenes from the book of Tobit, scenes from the book of Judith, and all of these are found in multiple places in many different examples in early Christian art from the 2nd through 5th centuries. So here's a few examples. We have the engraved bowl from Montenegro with a portrait of Susanna, and it says Susanna above her head, so there's no question who it is. We have Susanna and the two elders. This is an example that dates to the 5th century. This is from Thessaloniki, Greece. But there are lots of examples of this particular icon type in Rome in the catacombs. And then there's a cupola or a dome in the Santa Constanza Mausoleum in Rome. And the original 4th century mosaic contained images of Susanna on there and scenes from the story of Susanna. There on the same dome, there's an image of Tobit with a fish, dates to the 4th century. There's a fresco in Rome, in the catacombs of Rome, with Raphael, the angel, and Tobit holding the fish. And we have a few instances even of Bel and the dragon. This is Daniel with the poisoned cake that he's giving to the dragon. There's a reference to icons of Tobit and Judith, which is very interesting because we don't have any extant examples of images of Judith from the early church, but we have a reference to an icon of Judith from the early church in St. Paulinus of Nola. He writes, "The two gates extending on the right and left are adorned each with a twofold inscription and depiction of faith. One is covered by the holy achievements of saintly men, the trial of Job by ulcers, and of Tobias through his eyes. The other gate is occupied by the lesser sex in the portrayal of renowned Judith, and also the powerful Queen Esther." So this is a reference to an icon of Judith, which is very exciting because we don't have any of these in the archaeology that survived. We have a reference to them. So we know that there were icons of Judith in the early church, even though we don't have those today in our archaeological record. There are many examples of the three youths in the furnace, and they are always shown in Oran's position, that's praying and praising. And the reference to them praying and praising is found only in the Deuterocanonical portions of the book of Daniel. So this is an indication that the early Christians were using the Deuterocanonical portions of Daniel in their Bibles. So the argument then is that early Christian iconography agrees with other early Christian witnesses of the widespread use of the Deuterocanon. Okay, so Origen tells us that Susanna is found in every church of Christ and that the churches use Tobit. So he's talking about the books that are in the Christian Bible versus the Jewish Bible, and they're saying that the Christians are all using the same Bibles, and those include the Deuterocanonical books. The early Christian writers agree with Origen. We have Irenaeus, who references wisdom in Susanna. Clement of Alexandria in the 2nd century references Baruch and Judith. Hippolytus in the 2nd and early 3rd century references 1st Maccabees, and so on. There's a ton of references to the Deuterocanonical books in early Christian writers, while iconography also witnesses the Deuterocanonical books in its art. So iconography in the early church indicates the Deuterocanon's widespread usage in the churches. And it's used all around the empire. It's not isolated into one place, but it agrees with Origen that it's in every church. Churches all around the empire are using these scenes from the Deuterocanonical books. And some of these images are very old, even contemporary with Origen, dating back to the 3rd century. So this map is marked with locations where Deuterocanonical icons have been discovered. You'll see they're dispersed throughout the empire, and it's not isolated into one place. So there wasn't a local tradition of using the Deuterocanon, just like Origen said. It's in use in all the churches. So these stars are marking locations where images of Tobit have been discovered, the Prayer of Azariah, scenes of Judith, and so on. are marked on this map, and you can just see visually the widespread dispersion and use of these images in the early church. So the second argument to be made from the iconography is that the images from the Deuterocanon are placed alongside other biblical scenes. Okay, so the same walls that have scenes from the Bible have scenes from the Deuterocanon, which indicates that the early Christians saw Deuterocanonical stories as being biblical stories, a part of the Bible. And there's no indication by their placement on the walls that there's any kind of lower status or second place that the Deuterocanon falls into. So this example I have on the screen, this is a sarcophagus from the catacombs of San Sebastiano in Rome. This dates to the 3rd century. And on this sarcophagus are scenes of Adam and Eve, Balaam and the donkey. There are apostles. Jesus is on here multiplying the loaves and fishes. We have Ezekiel resurrecting the dead. And there on the far right is Tobit with the fish and the angel Raphael. So the story of Tobit here is placed alongside these other biblical stories as if it were a biblical story. But this is not an isolated instance. There's other ones. We have the bowl base from Rome. This is the bottom of a bowl that was discovered in Rome. It dates to around the 4th century. And we have Jesus healing the paralytic on here. We have Jesus multiplying the loaves and fishes. We have the 3 youths in the furnace. And along with all of these stories, there's Tobit, and he's got that fish. And this is in a circle, all presented as biblical themes and biblical stories. So that it doesn't seem to be treated as if this were apocryphal or second class or something like that, but it's presented as just another biblical story by the early Christians. And again, that cupola or dome in the Santa Constanza mausoleum that dates to the 4th century had depictions of deuterocanonical stories alongside other biblical stories. So this is a 16th century drawing of the original mosaic that dates to the 4th century. The mosaic is gone today, but during the 16th century, it was still visible, certain parts of it. And this is what one artist at the time copied down from that cupola, from that dome. And he shows Daniel and the lions on here, Rahab with the 2 spies, Cain and Abel, and along with these biblical stories is Tobit and the fish, and Susanna and Daniel and the elders, and all within the same artistic array, showing these scenes presented as biblical stories. There's the fresco in Rome. This is from the Quemiterium Jordanorum. And there's a whole bunch of biblical stories here. We have Moses striking the rock, Jesus multiplying loaves and fishes, the adoration of the Magi's on here, Noah in the ark, Jesus raising Lazarus, Daniel and the lions, Jesus healing the paralytic. You'll notice all of these are biblical stories. They're not including any Gnostic, apocryphal, weird legend stories. They're including only biblical stories. And who's there right in the bottom in the middle is Tobit, Raphael, and the fish. So the story of Tobit here is being placed alongside in the same wall, in the same array of biblical stories as all the other biblical stories. And then we have the Greek chapel in the catacombs of Priscilla. This dates pretty early to the 3rd century. Again, this is contemporary with Origen of Alexandria, co-witnessing with him the widespread use of the Deuterocanon in early Christian churches. And in this room on the walls, there's Moses striking the rock, the 3 youths in the furnace, Jesus raising Lazarus, Noah in the ark, the adoration of the Magi, Jesus healing the paralytic. And in this room are scenes from the cycle of Susanna on the same walls in the same room, presented as biblical stories. So again, this is evidence that the early Christians saw these as real biblical stories and placed them alongside other biblical stories. So in conclusion, along with Origen and other early Christian writers, early Christian iconography is a witness to the widespread use of the Deuterocanon in the early church. So we have the early Christian writers, early fathers, who are referencing and citing from these books. We have Origen saying that they're in all the churches. And then we have the iconography that is showing these stories in all the churches. So we have a third independent witness to the Deuterocanon's canonical status in the early church in the iconography. And by placing Deuterocanonical icons next to other biblical icons, early Christians indicated an equal status of these stories with other biblical stories. So that's today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, please leave a comment below, subscribe, like, and I'll see you next time.